Hey everyone, welcome back. Good to see you. We're here for our, Kevin, what is this, our sixth episode?
This is number 6.
Over chapter 7. For those of you who missed it, last time we did planning and the rule of law. This time, it's about, Kevin, what's our chapter about this time? It's planning and economics.
It's economic control and totalitarianism. Chapter 7.
There you go. Economic control and totalitarianism. Yeah, we're believe it or not, folks, I'm actually more awake now than I was last night when Kevin and I started. We were going to record last night, and we were going through the notes, and we just both were like getting more and more tired because it was like at the end of the night. Kevin's been sick.
We prepped for sick. 3 hours. We're on for 3 hours and never recorded the thing.
Right. And yeah, at the end, I was like, hey, we should come up with some symbols to put above sections in the notes. And so we can know who's going to read what. And then we spent like 20 minutes looking at all the symbols in Google Docs. And then Kevin chose it as his symbol, a toilet. And I said, are you really going to pick a toilet? And he goes, are we really using symbols? And I'm like, okay, we're tired, aren't we? So like, I think we hit a bit of a wall. So we're, yeah. But we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, or some version of it, this morning / afternoon, whatever. So here we are. Kevin, you want to give a quick couple of bullet points over the previous one, over chapter 6?
Yeah, sure. So chapter 6. Yeah, chapter 6 went over planning and the rule of law. And so it had a lot of really good points in there. And they kind of move over to here where this chapter really starts out more in economics. These next 2 chapters, actually, chapter 7, chapter 8, they're both a lot in economics. We're actually going to combine them together, but there's so much material in both. Like usual, it's impossible to actually do that. So the first takeaway we really took from chapter 6 is that there are rules that allow us to reasonably predict what others will do as long as we're all following the same set of rules. So to take this a quick excerpt from the chapter, because he puts it here beautifully, quote, rules which make it possible to foresee with fair certainty how the authority will use its coercive powers in given circumstances and plan one's individual affairs on the basis of this knowledge. It is the idea that you have to know the rules of the game before entering the game, or if you decide not to do that, or if you allow whomever is making the rules of the game to change them while you're already playing the game, there's no way you can reasonably predict what everyone else is going to do, which allows you to play the game with any sort of strategy. So the rule of law part here, obviously it's part of the title of the chapter, extremely important if we all want to understand what we're going to be doing with each other. Next bullet point, with equality of opportunity, you will always cause inequality of outcome. To force equality of outcome is to take away all opportunities. So this is the idea of, the big talking point now is we want equity. Well, what does equity mean? Equity means equality of outcomes. If you want equality of outcomes, there's no way you can say you can give everyone else the equality of opportunity, which is what equality in our mind used to be. It's like, okay, we all have the same opportunities. We're not going to come with the same outcomes. The population is large and diverse as the United States, much less the whole Western world. There's no possibility that we're all going to see the same outcomes. And one of the talking points of the modern day planners, socialists, whatever you want to call them, is, oh, look at all these disparate outcomes. That obviously means that there's something wrong with the opportunities. Well, no, it does not mean there's something wrong with the opportunities. And if you're going to fix those outcomes, now you have to change those opportunities according to whomever you want to bring up to the next group that you see all those disparities with. So it's a very, very dangerous game to play. And then the next one, the last one we're going to talk about here, is he talks about the abuse of the word privilege. I don't know if you've ever heard of the word privilege or see it abused at all. We have white privilege. It's just your skin tone allows you this certain privilege. And that is not what the word privilege is meant to be used as. So he explains, it is not a privilege if we can all acquire it under the same set of rules. Again, we go back to the first bullet point. If we all work under the same rules, well, then there's no real privilege there, because we should all be able to operate kind of with these same tools. Now, privilege can also mean, you're born in a better circumstance, which we'll get to in this chapter a little bit. But it's when you put in arbitrary rules, well, that's a real privilege. And that's what the socialist planners, want to do. So, so it's not, this is not to say that, like I just said, that everyone begins the same place or acquires it with the same degree of ease or difficulty. What matters is that the rules of the game allow for those who are even incredibly behind from the starting place in life to advance from that point, should they so desire. So it is you getting the tools, the ability of your own life to make it better, if we can all follow the same rules. And in that context, privilege does not necessarily apply, at least in the way it's abused today.
Totally. And, even just to piggyback on the second bullet point real fast, the idea, quality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, it's one of those things where we see this, and they even use, I think, didn't Johnson use the example of the foot race? You don't put a man, at the race and whenever everyone else has been running for a while and say, go and run it, you have to give him a head start. That was his justification for a lot of the Great Society programs to try and create that equality of outcome. But, we do know that even in that situation, that doesn't mean that a person is going to stay behind, because they might be a faster runner than someone who, had a head start, and so that's the point of having all the same rules, is that even if people do have different starting places, they still have the equal opportunity to advance themselves. If you think about like a tryout, for some type of, I don't know if you, I actually, I know that you played sports in high school, and then in college. So, I mean, whenever you're doing your football tryouts, especially at the very beginning, they decide, are you going to be on when it's younger? I don't know if they do like A, B, and C leagues where you're at, but they decide which team you're going to be on based on how good you are. But just because you start out on the C team, because maybe you weren't very fast or you hadn't hit a growth spurt or whatever, doesn't mean you can't be on the A team by next year. It's just a matter of, does everyone have the same rules? And if you're forcing the same outcomes, then all that's going to do is push the quality and the standards lower, not raise everyone up to a higher place.
And that also gets into the disparate outcome aspect of it. Like if you're bigger, you're naturally faster. There's some gifts that you get that you're going to be naturally better at this one thing than other people. And that's what causes that disparate outcome. And it's not just distilled to only biology, it's distilled to culture. There's a whole bunch of, there's 1,000 factors that go into what is going to determine your outcome. And just to say, if you try to distill it to one thing, like racism is what's causing disparities. Okay, well, now you're taking this very simple one variable analysis, and you're going to make arbitrary rules on that analysis, and that's when authoritarianism comes in.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so to kind of set up this chapter for you all, one of the things that we talked about, I believe, in maybe the last 2 episodes even, is that Hayek does a really brilliant job here of making a case, and he kind of layers this like an onion in terms of, hey, gradually building the argument of here's the road we were on, here's the road we're going down, and explaining some of the main tensions between socialism as an idea in the minds of those who are advocating for it and the actual outcomes of these things. And one of the themes here is how the lack of consensus will create the necessity of coercion. And another way of conceptualizing coercion is to think about how, like, the planner is going to have to take control of more and more aspects of society in order to execute their plan. And so, 2 chapters ago is about democracy and how that and planning are incompatible. Last chapter was about the rule of law, like, everyone operating, as Kevin mentioned, under the same rules of the game and having to abide by the same laws and so on and so forth. And how the planner is going to have to take control of that. And this one is about the economic system. And so that's why it's called economic control and totalitarianism, is because it's like, in order to execute the plan, they have to have what is effectively a totalitarian grasp, and dictatorship is the words that Hayek uses, of the economic system. And as we'll get into in the chapter, there was a lot of people who thought that, like, the realm of economics was just this one little facet of life that didn't, like, it's like, oh, that's nothing, that's this tiny thing, and it doesn't relate to all these other things. But as we'll get into, and as Hayek explains, our economic system, our exchange of goods and services, and our actual labor into that system is, the root of literally all other aspects of life and our ability to live our lives. So anyway, so that's kind of the continuation of that theme. So if you guys are thinking about, if you've been watching this, which we appreciate, and thinking about the themes of this book, the theme of this chapter continues that idea of how the planner is going to have to obtain more and more control of society until it's just a total control, and it's hence totalitarianism. And real fast, so there's two words that we tend to define at the beginning of each of these, because whenever we're using them and the way that Hayek uses them, it's going to be very different than the contemporary understanding of the word. So the first one is liberal. I don't know if liberal is used that much in this chapter, but it's still, in case it is, for you guys to again understand what this means. Whenever yeah, that's right. So when Hayek talks about liberalism being this thing that got us here in terms of a prosperous society, he's talking about classical liberalism, liberal in the sense of how it was used in, Europe and Great Britain at that time, which for our context, just think libertarian, think freedom, maybe even think conservative a little bit. It just means like letting people do what they want to do, giving people freedom, that kind of thing, being open-minded, whatever. And then the other term is planning, and planner, we'll use planner and planning a lot in this conversation. And so in Hayek's time, people talked about, they called for planning. We needed planners to plan society. And that's just another way of saying having this top-down control over whatever it is, the thing that they want planning over. So in this case, it's having top-down control over economic system as opposed to bottom-up. You have these free exchanges that come about from people just having the freedom to do that. The example I've given before is like in the ocean, no one is directing how the schools of fish are swimming by each other, and like the ecosystem. If you look at the complexities of like a coral reef and stuff, a planner would look at that and say it's chaos. No one's telling them what to do. And it's like, yeah, but no one needs to tell them what to do. They're able to figure that out on their own. And so, but the planners want there to be this total control by these benevolent, wise, elite experts of society who know better than us. So whenever you think planner, think socialism, think like stifling bureaucracy, think just total control, lack of freedom. I don't know, Kevin, if I missed anything there, go ahead and fill it in, but otherwise, we can get started on that.
Yeah,
Belloc quote.
Planning is, you think, coercive authority. In order to plan, like you must have the ability to coerce people to follow the plan. Obviously, you can't. If people are not going to end up following the plan, then the whole plan's going to fall apart, and you're going to either have to blame them or they're going to oust you. But I think you put it very succinctly, and even this chapter is titled Economic Control and Totalitarianism, but it could be titled Economic Control Leads to Totalitarianism. And I think that's why he pieced those together, and throughout the chapter you'll begin to understand that.
Yep. Rock on. All right, so do you want to move? Let's get into that. Well, I'll give this quote that kind of tees it up here, that lays the groundwork. So the control of the production of wealth is the control of human life itself, Hilaire Belloc. And so that's the idea. So, here's kind of one of the main takeaways is that if someone, whenever he says production of wealth, that's the means of production, that's, labor input, that's the economy. So the control of how people produce wealth, which is usually through labor or, acquiring money to help them, buy into property ownership, whatever. If someone controls that thin slice or whatever of society, they actually control all of human life itself. And so this is where Hayek is trying to dispel this idea that you can separate the economic aspect of society from all of the rest of our lives. You just can't do that. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, so he starts with the chapter bringing in some themes from previous chapters, as he often does, to kind of help us understand how these are all being related to each other. So opening chapter, quote, "Our economy is a complex system of interrelated activities. If it is to be consciously directed at all, it must be directed by a single staff of experts whose actions must not be fettered by democratic procedure." We've seen this theme in several chapters before. I like to highlight whenever he puts in the experts there, that's another, if he were around today and were to do another revision of this book, I think he'd probably dedicate one whole chapter to the experts. And so it might be a big picture of Dr. Fauci there, some other white lab coat, that even if they have the best of intentions, that doesn't matter. They're singularly focused on this one thing. And by ignoring all the other things, all the other externalities, you can really drift into totalitarianism rather quickly. So always be aware of the experts. You hear someone say, listen, follow the experts. But to continue, quote, one of the most prominent economic planners, Stuart Chase, assures us that in a planned society, political democracy can remain if it confines itself to all but economic matters. So he's talking about, planners can control stuff if they just stay in this narrow scope of economic planning. Is that, realistic? Probably not. So continue. Such assurances are usually accompanied by the suggestion that by giving up freedom in what are or ought to be the less important aspects of our lives, we shall obtain greater freedom in the pursuit of higher values. On this ground, people who abhor the idea of a political dictatorship often clamor for a dictatorship in the economic field. So, I mean, they give it away right there. Once you say, all right, we don't want to think, he goes a bit later about, the higher values idea. It's like, why focus on these small little things like food, shelter, and clothing when you could think of these higher values? Right. It's like, they're important, they're essential, but like, why should you worry about these little kind of mundane details? So if you allow the planners to take control of the economy part of this, the small little section of our lives called the economy, why wouldn't this work? Why wouldn't they be able to just stay strictly in the economic sphere and not drift over into the social sphere? But then we got to ask ourselves, is this even possible to be separated? Yep. And I think when you dig, you don't have to dig very deep to start to understand, no, I don't think it's possible. And I think it would be unwise to give some large central authority all this power just over economic matters.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that quote is, he says, political democracy can remain if it confines itself to all but economic matters, which sounds like a threat for starters, where it's like, we'll let you have your little democracy, as long as you stay out of the economic matters, which of course, the economic matters control all of the rest of it. So it doesn't really matter. But there is also this thing, and you'll see this language more and more throughout the chapter, where he talks about we'll obtain greater freedom in the pursuit of higher values, and there's higher values and lesser values, and things are more important, things are lesser important. And the main issue, and a lot of this boils down to, it's like, who decides what the higher value is and what the lesser value is? I mean, that's what we talked about with the lack of a big hierarchy of values for that all of society shares. If we don't all agree on what is more important or less important, what's more valuable or less valuable, then it's going to be very difficult to obtain any kind of consensus whenever a plan's put in place. Because, back to that, the Neapolitan dilemma that, we talked about a few episodes ago, where it's like, even if your number one value is my number 5 value, those are probably going to overlap, less than 2 or 3% of the time. And that's if they're even both within the top 5. So, and so on and so forth. So it's just not possible, like you said. And I think you have a good note here where it says planners claim to only manage the economy and stay out of social lives. But can this be separated? No, it would be unwise to believe so. And like, one of the things I thought about, was that example that we talked about last night with the cows. Do you think, can we get into the cows for a minute here, just to kind of tee up this chapter here?
Talk them up.
So, Thomas Sowell has this great explanation of economics, and that is in his book, spoiler alert, Basic Economics, where he says that economics is fundamentally a system of rationing. It's not a system of necessarily providing things, but it's about rationing things, because the problem is you have an infinite demand, or ideas of how to use certain things, and you have a limited amount of those things. So you need to come up with a system that rations those goods or services in a way that only the people who like find them most valuable are the ones who get them. And so the opposite. So let's say we have planning, and let's just take one thing. Okay. So in the economy, and that would be cows. So, beef is a product, leather is a product, all of whatever else they make out of, cow hooves, I don't know if they use that stuff to make glue still, like they do with horses, or if that was just a
It's just their mascot now.
Urban legend, but anyway.
Well, they still have a cow on the front of that
That's
Elmer's
right.
glue thing. So.
Well, exactly. I know that they use those for other things. So if the government were to control, just the economy, and let's say they only controlled cows and everything that had to do with cows. Well, now you're looking at, they control all the sale barns, they control all the feedlots, they control the ranches, and they have to push everyone out who previously was a rancher. So now they're out of a job. Oh, well, but you're a rancher. You had, in some cases, literally millions of acres. Well, you don't need that anymore. So we're going to go ahead and take your land because we need that grazing land. Now the government is in control of where the cattle are going to graze, how they're going to get their water, all of these other things. What about getting their food brought in if they have to buy hay from other farms? Well, we might as well seize control of the production of hay or whatever other thing. Well, we're going to, if we're going to butcher these cows, then now they're going to have to control the manufacturing plants, the plants where they do all that stuff with the cows. And then, well, what are we going to do with the beef? Well, these hot dog vendors want it for ball games. Taco Bell wants it for, whatever other thing. All the think of all the places use cheese and beef, for the myriad of things. You're looking at the entire food industry in the country is now having to go through the government in order to do anything. What if I want to open a burger stand or, burger place? I have to think about the government. Does the government think that we need another burger place or not? Right? What if I want to open a leather shop? Like, I've got a friend who owns a leather shop that he started from the ground up. And now he went from going online. This is one of the places that actually opened during COVID here. Now he has a storefront. This is what happens when you live in a state that isn't run entirely by crazy people. Liz Cheney, obviously not included in that statement, but like, he was able to, what if now he has to go through the government to get his leather? And what if the government says, no, we don't want to sell you that because we want to use the leather over here for these boots or for these hats, okay, but then who's going to distribute it? Now we're going to have, now the government has to own the stores, or at least they have a monopoly on the prices of leather to go to these other places. And so the point is that they get to decide what's the best use of beef. Do they have hot dogs, on the street in Chicago or at ball games anymore? Do we have beef tacos? Do we, at these other places? Like, they control all the places with cheese, ice cream, like all of this stuff, sour cream, like milk, everything, just from them controlling cows. And that's not even getting into the supply lines of, the trucking and getting them to and from places, like all of these things. And so if you were to just think of one thing in society, in the economic sphere, which is cows, if the government controlled that, it affects all of these other things. And as Kevin mentioned earlier about like how we have to have these rules that we all agree to, that we kind of have a mutual understanding of, so we can make plans for our lives and do things. Like, my ability to open a restaurant, my ability to open a leather place, my ability to maybe, I guess I can't be a rancher now, I can't, all of these other things is completely stifled. I can't buy, what if I want to buy land adjacent to where they're grazing the government cattle, and they're known for annexing the land that's adjacent to them if they want to expand their grazing capacity. So now I can't, plan on doing anything there. I can't build any business around there either, because they might want to annex it and tear it down just so cows can graze there. And so there's all these things that get totally screwed up whenever you have the control of just this one thing. And so then you extrapolate that out to everything else in the economy, and you see how totalizing this is. And that's what Hayek is trying to dispel here, where he's like, this is not some minor thing. This is literally everything. This is everything. And so whenever they say, oh, hey, trust us with this one little thing, it's like, they know damn well that it's not this one little thing. This is every single thing. But this is how it gets in, opens the door to totalitarianism, is by, making that kind of ridiculous belief, erroneous belief, as he says. Hayek references, he says that this is an erroneous belief that there are purely economic ends separate from the other ends of life. It's just not the case. I'll finish this quote out here, Kevin, and then we're going to move on to the next part.
Sure.
So he says, the ultimate ends of activities of reasonable beings are never economic. So that's the point here, is that it's like, if I'm going into being a rancher or whatever, like, it's not just for like this economic end in and of itself, or if I'm trying to make money to buy something, it's not just to make the money itself, but it's to pursue the things that I want to pursue. Strictly speaking, there is no economic motive, but only economic factors conditioning our striving for other ends. What in ordinary language is misleadingly called economic motive merely means the desire for general opportunity, the desire for power to achieve unspecified ends. If we strive for money, it is because it offers us the widest choice in enjoying the fruits of our efforts. So again, the point is you can't separate economic freedom from freedom in these other aspects of life. It is through the pursuit of economic freedom and my own ends of making money and having these mutually beneficial arrangements with people that I can then pursue the other things that I want to do in life. The thing Kevin and I talked about last night was, it's like, why is Richard Branson, why did he go to space? It's like, if this was all just purely economic, then it'd just be Scrooge McDuck swimming around in a thing of money just because he likes it. But Richard Branson made a lot of money, so he has a lot of options available to him of what would make him happy. That's the point, is it's not the money in and of itself, but the money represents the ends, the things that he wants. And people have more ambition, some people have less ambition. And so they can choose what they want to do based on how much ambition they have, based on their desires. But that's the point, is everyone has the freedom to choose. And you can't give up your freedom in the economic space to make those choices without giving up your freedom in all of these other areas. And that's kind of the point here. Did I miss something, Kevin? Did that make sense?
No. So, the little note I have down here is that economics cannot be separated from individual freedom as a secondary concern. And this is kind of how they brandish, how they brand, you're like, okay, we'll take over this because it's not of major concern to your life. You want leisurely time, you want to lay out on the beach, you want to do all these things. Like, why worry about economics? But the problem is that economics, those economic concerns, are directly linked to our ability to choose our own ends. Money is just a means to an end. You don't just, like you said, you don't just build Donald Duck money bins to go swimming around in. No, you use that capital on something else. So if we want more choice in a free market system, we must find ways to create more value for others. I mean, that's kind of the brilliant side of it. It's like, okay, if you're a rich person, that means most likely you had to develop something that's extremely useful for a whole bunch of other people that's helping society, even though planners claim that socialism is the real thing that helps society, because now we get to, as a central authority, dictate, what makes society better. So if you want more choice under a planned society, you're just out of luck. Unless you try to get power, political power, to widen those choices, or just make the choices that you like more, that's going to be a large coercive power that you must force upon everyone else.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a useful thing. Like you said, it's, if you're wealthy, it's because you did something really useful. That's the beauty of it. You can be an artist, and I'm not saying art is useless, all right, people, but my point is that there are things that have subjective value. And so in a free market society, I can say, hey, I provide this weirdo service, this whatever thing. And if there's a market for it, if people want to spend money on it, that's my argument in favor of modern art. I hate modern art. I hate all of this stuff. But if there's a market for that, if, women, there's ones who'd make period blood paintings, I think that's insane. But people will buy those. That's the point. It's like, in a free society where people can say, hey, I have a thing and I'm going to throw it out there to the market and see if people want to buy it. If they do, great. That's the point. And how all of this is all based on people's own subjective desires, their own subjective preferences, their own subjective things that cause them enjoyment, and so on and so forth, and their subjective interests, and how they rank order value those things, right? People buy those crazy healing crystals and stuff, like all of these things. But in a society that has planners, it's like, well, you don't need that. Because I don't think you need that. And I think that's dumb or whatever. So we're not going to have that. And so the point is the way you get all of these crazy niche things is in a society where people are free to decide what they want and what they don't want. And it's not a secondary concern. Like you said, it's not some tiny, off the side issue. It really is, as Belloc said, it's all of human life filters through this one thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we added another note here that really pounds this idea home, but really it's the ability to exchange goods and services for capital or money allows us to choose what we want to spend that capital on. By changing out free capital with non-economic compensation, i.e. like power, position, and other public benefits, you are now limited to what those planners give you. Free capital gives you choice. Non-economic incentives do not, which is why Hayek goes on to say, it would be much truer to say that money is one of the greatest instruments of freedom ever invented by man. If you destroy that instrument, you're going to take away that freedom. Those things are interlocked with each other. And there's a great quote at the end that says, this is a prerequisite to a lot of different things. If you don't have this freedom, you don't allow people to have this type of freedom. There's all kinds of freedoms that will go along the wayside with it, because as we've, explained now, all this stuff is interlocked together.
Yeah. And, an example of that, that we talked about last night before getting super drowsy, was, so whenever I was a kid, before I was old enough to actually get like an actual job, I would shovel people's sidewalks, shovel snow on sidewalks. And so it's like, let's say I'm that kid and I'm wanting to get money to buy a bike. And so I'm going around and I'm shoveling sidewalks and for this agreed upon price. And I shovel this huge area. They have a big driveway or whatever. And I spend all this time on it. And then at the end they say, oh, actually, we're not going to give you money. We made you some cookies, or here's some clothes, or whatever thing. It's like, okay, but now I'm stuck with that one thing, right? How does that get me closer to my bike? And so what money does, and having this system where we can determine the value of and things through this agreed upon currency, it makes it to where we can pursue our own ends. Whereas if you just get stuck with a system where your compensation for anything is some preset thing by some higher power, a planner, they don't actually help you get to the things you value. And also it makes it where you're much more fragile in an area where it's like, if I have to do this one thing to get shoes or to get electricity, it's like, if that thing falls through, I don't get shoes or electricity anymore, or if I don't want to do that, then I'm not going to get those things. As opposed to a system with money, it's like, I can do this and then I can spend it here, 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 here. Or if I lose a little bit of money here, I can stop, I can cancel my Netflix or whatever to make sure that I get these other things. So it makes it where there's a lot more anti-fragility, I guess, in, your own personal life and also in how you pursue things as well. All right, I'm done with the metaphors for now.
Yeah. No, I mean, you get the point that it's you that must be able to make these choices. And toward the end, he talks about, this type of freedom is a risk and responsibility. It really is. And that's why people are sort of afraid to take on this responsibility, because it is intimidating, right? You don't like to fall behind on bills and say, oh, I got to get rid of Netflix. I got to get rid of all these other things and, shift my priorities somewhere else. But in a planned society, you just don't get a choice in those priorities at all. Like if you really value Netflix, even though it's a commodity that you don't need, no one needs Netflix, except for the Obamas, but you can actually choose and what you need, what's important to you. So this next quote kind of dives into that a little bit as well. So quote, many people believe that anything which, like economic planning, affects only our economic interests cannot seriously interfere with the more basic values of life. This, however, is an erroneous conclusion. Economic values are less important to us than many things precisely because in economic matters, we are free to decide what to us is more and what is less important. Or as we might say, because in the present society, it is we who have to solve the economic problems in our lives. Just like you talked to there, if you have an economic problem arises, you get to shift your priorities to that problem and solve the problem yourself. Yep. The question raised by economic planning is therefore not merely whether we shall be able to satisfy what we regard as more or less important needs in the way we prefer. It is whether it shall be we who decide that what is more and what is less important to us, or whether this is to be decided by a central planner. Economic planning would not affect merely those of our marginal needs that we have in mind when we speak contemptuously about the merely economic. It would in effect mean that we as individuals shall no longer be allowed to decide what we regard as marginal. So I mean, just like you explained before, you get to decide what is less important to you. And if you think that this thing that's super important to other people, you think like having a nice car, if you don't find that to be super important because you live in a city and it's like, why have a nice car? I can bike. I'd rather have a decent bike, have all these other amenities at home, a larger TV, all this type of stuff. Or you have a central planner who's like, well, we prioritize this type of transportation, or the other way. It's like, I really want a car, but it's like, well, it's global warming, so we're going to force you to have a bike and not a car. It's like, you don't get to prioritize that. And how comfortable is it going to be if you allow that authority to go to some central planner?
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And this is one of the things. So this chapter, I think, progresses really, really nicely, and I really like it. Because of that, and especially what he's getting into next, and then the thought after it. But so he goes from saying, look, economics is not just one little area, it's this entire area. And whenever you have the government is in control of all of the means of production and all of the economy, like I'm going to read that one part of the quote again because it's worth restating. The question raised by planning is therefore not merely whether we shall have the ability to satisfy what we regard as less or more. So it's not just a question of, are we going to be able to obtain those things that we value, but whether or not it's us who even decides what is less or more important, or whether it's decided by the planner. So it takes it one step further to where it's like, it's not merely hey, I want, whatever niche thing is, okay, let's do the thing we talked about last night where you were talking about the hockey teams in America, and you said that there's some good teams like in Florida, and I think you said in Mexico City, not Mexico City.
No.
Was it Mexico City?
No. I use that as an example. It's like you think Florida, there's all these Canadian teams. You'd think the Canadian teams would be the good ones, but no, there's this Florida team that's now in the championship. To me, that's like thinking that a Mexico City team would do really well at hockey, even though there's no possible way other than obviously indoor, which most hockey is, that they'd be able to practice.
And the point is it's like under communism, there would be no Florida hockey team. And so the question isn't, whether or not we'll be able to, have our Florida hockey team get some kind of priority, but whether or not we'll even be able to have one period under planning, because we aren't the ones who even get to decide what's more or less important. We will be told what is more or less important by the planner, because they're the ones allocating the resources. They're the ones allocating the goods and services. And we'll get to the services part here in a minute, and how that impacts us, and how Hayek takes it one step further yet again in terms of the totalitarian aspect of this. But this is the thing you guys have to key in here, where it's like, these quotes, it can get kind of clunky, but just think about this of like, look, if the government controls just one aspect of society, that's something like the economy, they control everything. And that includes like, what is your subjective opinion of what's about more or less important? You don't get to decide that. They're going to tell you what's more or less important. And they'll do that in a variety of ways. And that's kind of what the next part gets into here, where it's in a free society, like we should be able to choose what type of life we want to live. And, if we want to be rich and work to produce a lot, then we can do that. If we want to have a life of free time and be less concerned about being rich, we can live accordingly. But the point is it's us who gets to decide. And so this is where Hayek moves from. So progression is, okay, economics is not some small matter. It encompasses all of life, so the production of goods and services, like all of these things, like the materials that are necessary to do things, everything. We use the cow example that impacts, a very large majority of the population, just that one thing. So now you extrapolate that over the entire economic system, everything in the economic system, that's all of our society. And then Hayek gets into, well, wait a second, there's this other aspect of the economy. It's not just the things being produced, it's those who are producing it. What's that? That's us, right? That's us. We are part of the economy. Our labor is part of the economy. And so Hayek says they aren't just going to control the things that are made, the widgets, but they're going to control the widget makers. They're going to control the labor, which is us. And that's one of the ways that this could become so totalizing, is because it's not just about the items, but it's about us. So that kind of gets us into that next part there.
Yeah. When you talk about it's about us as, consumers, it's kind of the Marx philosophy of allowing the people to own the fruits of their own labor by government coercion. Like, do you actually own those fruits? Or now that a planner has come in, you don't really own them. It's whatever the planner dictates what's important for you to use those resources as. Do you even own those in reality? You actually don't own them. So he continues out the quote, not only in our capacity as consumers, however, and not even mainly in that capacity would the will of the authority shape and guide our daily lives. It would do so even more in our position as producers. These two aspects of our lives cannot be separated. And as for most of us in the time we spend at our work is a large part of our total lives. And as the job usually also determines the place where and the people among whom we live, some freedom in choosing our work probably even more important for our happiness than freedom to spend our income during the hours of leisure. So even the ability to produce and kind of choose your capacity in which you can produce is just as important, if not even more important, than the way we spend our free time. He goes on to say, nothing makes conditions more unbearable than the knowledge that no effort of ours can change them. So it's like this, if I fall, behind on some project I'm working on, what feels worse about falling behind on that project is not even having the choice to start improving that area of my life. When a central planner comes in, they just say, no, you just can't. That's not something you're allowed to focus on right now. We're going to put our focuses here according to the plan. And that part is much more unbearable than, falling behind because of some, exterior force that, is forcing you to fall behind, and you have no opportunity to correct that. And he goes on, quote, and even if we should never have the strength of mind to make the necessary sacrifice, the knowledge that we could escape if we only strove hard enough makes many otherwise intolerable positions bearable. So, like it just said, it's your ability to choose is what makes that life bearable. And even when he talks about before about, happiness and choosing the way we act as a producer is sometimes more important than we spend our lives. A lot of us have our identities kind of woven into what we do as a profession, or what we do as a job, or even what we do as a homemaker. Somebody who spends more time with their kids. It's that choice that you get that kind of helps develop your own identity. And if you don't get that choice, if the central planner dictates what you get to do with your life as a producer, even as a homemaker, you now are absent of any sort of identity that can be pulled in from that.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And one of the really, I think, fundamental aspects there is in just how this ties into freedom or lack of freedom. As he says, look, what you do often might determine where you live, and where you live determines your social network, or let's say you grow up in a place that you like where you live and you like the people that you live around. And so you want to get a job there so that you can stay in that area. And planning removes all agency from that. And it creates this situation where he doesn't use the word hopeless, but it creates this hopeless situation where it's like you have no freedom to choose, what kind of work you want to do. And consequently, where you're going to live, who you're going to be around. I mean, you spend so much time with your coworkers, that's a big deal. I mean, just as one small example of this, of course, this is not something that's super accessible to most people, but, the movie 50 First Dates that Adam Sandler filmed was filmed in Hawaii just because Sandler wanted to film a movie in Hawaii. It wasn't integral to the plot. He was like, I think it'd be fun if we're going to shoot and we're going to be on location somewhere, let's do it in Hawaii. Why not? Let's just have a big vacation. We'll just make the script work for that. So like, that's, one thing there. I read an article the other day about how these people who have all these jobs that they can do from home now are traveling all over the place, and how, of course, this is something about the environment and how they're leaving all this trash behind or something, whatever. But the point is that if you choose your vocation, you can choose your location, your quality of life, all these other things. Planning removes all of that. So we've went from, can I actually buy a hamburger or get leather when I want, to can I work doing what I want to do, to can I live where I want to live and be around the people that I want to be around. And it just is so much control in this one area. And it's like the idea that you can escape from a situation, even if you don't think you would personally have the discipline or will to do it. Hayek is saying that like that still makes these things bearable, because there's that part of your mind of like, I could get out if I wanted to. Whereas you take something, I mean, again, I feel like I quote Yeonmi Park now, like in every single one of these, but she said North Korea is basically a concentration camp. there is, little hope of escape. It's just totally hopeless. And people do kill themselves. But even in that situation, if they kill themselves, their family has to take over their debt, and take over their workload and stuff. And so it's just there's no happiness, there's no love there, but that's the situation that this system creates. And it is really, if you think about it, like, just take a second to think about what that'd be like. Of someone tells you where you have to move to, what job you have to do, who you have to be around, when you have to work. That's, and their own, also, there's no escape outside of, bullet to the back of the head. Man, that's hell. That's torture, but that's where this goes.
Yeah, I think if you have a full planned economy, it has to run in some capacity like a labor camp.
Yep.
There's just no other way around it. That's how we understand how to run, a big coercive, the important word here is coercive, because it's not like working for Amazon where you get a choice and you get like, all right, if I'm not getting paid enough, I'm going to leave. If I don't like the working conditions, I can leave. That's not how a planned economy would work. It's like, where are you going to leave? You're going to move to Canada? I'd rather work in a planned economy. I'm just saying, but no, it's just like an inescapable factory, effectively. It's the whole country is this factory, and you only have limited power, limited freedom within that factory because there's no free exchange there.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly. And again, it becomes like a factory in that not just the widgets are being made, but we are the widgets also. We're the interchangeable units, as the next quote.
I think you're describing China.
Points out. That's exactly right. And you're talking about their economy, not a racial stereotype, right?
Yes.
I know. I'm just messing with you. So he goes on, he says, the freedom of choice would be purely fictitious, a mere promise to practice no discrimination, where in the nature of the case, discrimination must be practiced, and where all one could hope would be that the selection be made on what the authority believed to be the objective grounds. So your best hope is that the people who are making this decision for you are being somewhat objective. Again, not your best hope is freedom. Your best hope is in the benevolence of the planner. We shall no longer be free to be rational or efficient, only when and where we think it worthwhile. We shall all have to conform to the standards which the planning authority must fix in order to simplify the task. To make this immense task manageable, it will have to reduce the diversity of human capacities and inclinations to a few categories of readily interchangeable units, and deliberately to disregard minor personal preferences. Although the professed aim of planning would be that a man should cease to be a mere means, in fact, since it would be impossible to take account in the plan all of individuals' likes and dislikes, the individual would be more than ever become a mere means to be used by the authority in the service of such abstractions as the social welfare or the social good. And so, like, I really like this quote in the middle here where he says, we would no longer be free to be rational or efficient, only when and where we think it to be worthwhile. And he gets into this idea of people who want to work more and work less, and that rational and efficient when we think it's worthwhile gets into that idea at the end about the risk and reward of life. The point is that, like, people can be more ambitious and take risks, or be less ambitious, and there's a different set of risks that accompany that. But ultimately, we have the freedom to choose that. If someone, I give the example of the two hitchhikers I picked up. He's her road dog, and they're passing the Mountain Dew back and forth, and they've got the patchwork clothes. They wanted to do that. That's fine. Like, to the extent that it doesn't mess with other people, but that's fine with me. And the point is that in a planned society, people can do that, or they can be on the way opposite end and be Richard Branson and go to the moon, or not to the moon, but go to space, And so, probably eventually to the moon. But anyway, the point is that that's how that works in a free society. Whereas the planning would turn us all into these interchangeable units. And just a quick aside, how do you make a unit interchangeable? How do you universalize it? Well, you have to make it conform to a set standard. And if they're doing this across the human spectrum of capacities, is that going to be a high standard or a low standard? It's going to be a pretty low standard, because in order to make people interchangeable, you have to account for the fact that, like, a super smart person can be a janitor, but a janitor, in most cases probably isn't going to be a chemical engineer if someone just sticks them in the room, right? And so the point is that like we've mentioned before, whenever you universalize these things, it lowers the standard, it lowers the quality, it lowers the capacity for doing things, because you have to do that in order, because the reason why he says readily interchangeable is because the system is so arbitrary, and how the planner is going to decide things is they have to be able to take 20 people from here and put them over here, at the drop of a hat, because they decide it's necessary. And the only way you do that is by having this like very low res, kind of system of things that provides for only the most basic of items and only the most basic of things that, increase your quality of life. You're not going to get, well, hockey teams in Florida, or, fine art, or like a wide array of music and innovation, because you need the people to be doing, these other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your janitor comment, you've clearly never watched Good Will Hunting, but we'll let that slide.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
To me,
like those apples?
Yeah, to me, when you read that last paragraph, it reminds me of most like dystopian novels or books, even some like historical fiction or historical nonfiction books, where everyone's assigned a job rather than choosing from all possible jobs available to them, and that conform to their skill set in a free liberal society. This would be the inevitable practice of planning, is to be able to even, if there's a little bit of wiggle room to say, all right, we're going to make you take some sort of IQ test. Now you're available to these jobs, what
Yep.
if, even if a brilliant person, wants to be a janitor because they want more leisurely time. It's like, they don't want to spend their time, applying it in the field of chemical engineering. They want to, make enough money to get by and then spend their time in, a philosopher or something like that. So, depriving people of that choice is really where totalitarianism steps in, because now you're dictating via coercive authority.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what Hayek says there at the end of the quote, where it's like, people will become mere means in the name of the social welfare, the good of the community. And it's like, that's what you see in these propaganda posters, like in the Soviet Union, and also, in these movies, where it's like, I watched a really good review of, Starship Troopers, and how like the use of propaganda in that. And, we see this thing here about rallying people and making them cogs in the machine, as in the name of these abstractions like social welfare and the good of the community. I mean, we see that even today. Look at the conversation about masks and vaccines right now, where it's like, we need to make life hard for people who are unvaccinated. And all of these, every single article I read, whenever there's new Q&As about mask mandates, it includes questions like, what if I want to wear a mask to show people I'm a good person? Or what if there was one that this is maybe 2 or 3 days ago on CNN, where it was like, well, if I don't wear a mask, what if people think I'm unvaccinated? I don't want people to think I'm unvaccinated. It's like, why would they think you're unvaccinated if you're not wearing a mask? Isn't that the idea, is that you're vaccinated so you don't have to wear that? And so like there's all these abstractions, for the social welfare and the good of the community. And those words are used on purpose. One, because it's like, they're claiming the moral high ground. Two, there's nothing, distinct in there, for you to say, well, what do you mean by that? Or how are we doing at that? There's no guardrails on it. And two, if anyone opposes it, now what happens? Well, you're opposed to the social welfare. You don't care about the good of the community, and you can rally people's neighbors against them. Sound familiar? Whenever we get these authoritarian lines and it's super dystopian kind of rhetoric and propaganda, and that note there on, like, in these movies where people were assigned these tasks and assigned these jobs, like, that makes me think, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is like, why is it that most sci-fi or anything, book, movie, TV show, whatever, comic, that envisions the future, envisions it as being this type of society, right? Like, the ones that don't are usually because of some catastrophic event where, like, no one's in charge of anything. But the ones that do, like, envision a somewhat organized society, like an actual society in the future, it's like Star Trek, where it's like this federation that's socialist, basically, that controls all of these things. All the countries get together to form this kind of one world government. And you see this across the board in all of these things where they picture this kind of top down control things. And it's scary to me because of the overlaps between, okay, fiction, all of these futurists envision the future this way, the present, that in terms of this rhetoric and this propaganda, hey, get on board, the common good, right? And how that's being used to divide us. You're seeing that, I think it was the CDC said, when school starts back up again, I think things are going to get crazy when school starts back up again. It's the vaccinated students and teachers don't have to wear masks, according to the CDC. So, well, what does that do? It's like, oh, well, what about the unvaccinated? What about an unvaccinated 8-year-old? Why would an 8-year-old even be vaccinated in the first place, right? Why would a teacher who is 19 or not 19, but who is like 23 need to get vaccinated? And so it's all of this stuff and how that kind of overlaps with the propaganda crap of the past that we've seen in these places that actually became totalitarian, and with how all of these writers and futurists envision the future of society. And there's just too much of a concentric circle there. Like we're in the middle of that Venn diagram right now of the past, hellscape, and the future dystopian, fiction. Our current moment is the middle of that Venn diagram in a lot of ways. And so anyway, it just scares the hell out of me. I know that's a bit of an aside, but I thought it was at least worth thinking about for a second. I mean, I don't know what you think about that. If there's something, nothing there, but
I wish I could just say it's lazy writing. But there's a point there. There's a point that everyone takes this idealistic future. I mean, it's in some ways, there's some, books that I can't think off the top of my head where it becomes part of the story. You're like being assigned something becomes part of the story. But normally, like in that version, there's like, okay, if you don't meet certain standards, they're just going to euthanize you or something like that.
The Giver. The Giver.
Yeah. It is scary that we kind of envision this as almost an inevitable future. And I think that's kind of what the planning, what we've talked about in previous chapters. I think there's one literally called the inevitability of planning, right? So it is as soon as these societies get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that will get ramped up. The idea will get ramped up if we ever go to a world government, right? Because then that'll, be infinitely larger than we have now. The idea of planning and needing to plan all these things for the common good, which is this Orwellian term, if you would ever think about it, is scary. Basically. Right. Exactly. It's like, well, a common good, you got to come up with a hierarchy of ends, social scale of values. And when you get into that, you quickly find out it's like, okay, my voice to it doesn't matter anymore. So, it's a scary, scary future that we could be maneuvering into pretty quickly. Unless you got anything else, I'm going to go into the next when Hayek talks about the idea of an economic problem. This problem involves making a choice to quote, sacrifice our lesser needs in order to preserve the higher values, that life and health, beauty and virtue, honor and peace of mind can often be preserved only at considerable cost, and that somebody must make the choice is as undeniable as that we are all sometimes not prepared to make the material sacrifices necessary to protect those higher values against all injury. He actually uses a quick example of here. It's like the best way to not have as many car accidents is to eliminate cars. It's like, okay, well, that's the best way to solve that problem. And then I always kind of translate that to the best way to get rid of a pandemic is to all stay in our houses and wear masks, even though they're not necessarily get vaccinated. So, there's always that threat of injury, and the planners say, well, let's take the threat away. Like, we don't want you to get hurt. So we'll just plan all this stuff for you and take the choice away from you. So he goes on to say, people are all too ready to believe that the choice is not really necessary, that it is imposed upon them merely by a particular economic system under which they live. What they resent is, in truth, that there is an economic problem. So this is how you get a bunch of people with iPhones and going to these prestigious universities saying we need socialism because this darn economic system we're all oppressed under. This is because it's kind of this change from like, okay, you have to kind of manage your life to saying, all right, well, there's sacrifices in management of that life. And these people, this central authority is going to take that sacrifice away. and guarantee you a better life. So that's why people blame the economic system for having less than others when you see others have more. And you can do this in a free capitalist society. The irony of it, and like in a free society, you can make this criticism, and the planned society, you cannot make this criticism, even if it's valid. Yeah. So
what's the Hoffer quote really fast there? In a free society, equality is the cry of the masses, and in an equal society, freedom is the cry of the few.
Yeah. There was actually a quote that started out the last chapter is very, very similar to that I don't remember if we read. The Lord Acton quote, actually. So yeah, people don't want to admit that they have to sacrifice things in order to achieve what they call their higher values or goals. An example, people who are rich and successful tend to sacrifice a ton of free time in order to be the best. I mean, people think like all these ultra rich people just like sit back and just let the money pour in. But no, if you actually interview some of these people, it's like, no, I spent every waking hour trying to perfect my craft to be the best out there. And, this monetary capital gained is kind of just a side effect of them wanting to be the best in that industry. So, when people sit back and be like, oh, it's just, Bezos just sitting back in an armchair, flying on a private jet, going on all these, buying a luxury yacht, and he doesn't have to do anything. It's just all of his workers doing stuff. Well, no, that's never the case. And people are all too willing to ignore the necessity to sacrifice to be the best. And then they just say they want to change the economic system in the attempt to better their lives, in the attempt to kind of equalize this wealth distribution. So the planners are always willing to guarantee that better life. And as we've seen time and time again, as we see, I try not to be too like relevant in current events because, people might be watching this a year or two from now and might be like, what are you talking about? But Cuba, we see it right now. The planners promised them something in Cuba, and we're seeing right now it's not quite working out that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. One of the things, I mean, even just before getting to Cuba, there's this propensity that on people that are open or think that these are like good ideas that aren't too good to be true, to where I can't remember what the name of the fallacy is, but it's where you assume that where you see a problem or disparity is also where it originates. And so the example that I use is like, okay, if you look at the NBA and you say, okay, it's 80% black or something like that. And if you look at starters, I think starters, it's close to 90% black. If you're a person, you could look at that and say, oh man, look how racist the NBA is, right? Like the NBA, all of these teams and their team managers or whatever, they must not be recruiting or hiring all of these super well qualified, like Mongolian players and Jewish players, and Polynesian players and white players. Like they're being so racist against them. And so you could look at that phenomenon in the NBA and not try to look at anything behind the NBA or underneath of it that feeds the system where the players come up, and just assume that those disparities are the result of some type of injustice. And we see the same thing with any of these outcomes, like disparate outcomes in life and these inequalities. And they say, well, it must be the system. And the problem there is it's like, you're not going deep enough to look at what, and of course, by the way, the people who are oftentimes the ones who are making these generalizing claims don't want to go deep enough. Right. They're just trying to, harness the resentment of people that are where the system isn't working for them, which, by the way, that's an increasingly large group of people in America. It's not that they're being told that the system doesn't work for them. The system really isn't working for them in a lot of ways. And so they're being fed like, well, this is who you need to blame. This is who you need to blame. Give us power. Give us power. Well, we can guarantee you that it'll be better, like you said. And a place that tried that, was Cuba. And it's terrible. You want to look at what the definition of fake news is. You're getting where on Twitter where it was trending. And by the way, it only trended for like a day or two. And it's not trending now. But where it's, all of this unrest in Cuba is due to lack of COVID vaccines, and a few other things. It's like, no,
healthcare
was starving,
good, is what I heard.
Yeah, exactly. Their healthcare was too good. Michael Moore ends that movie Sicko, going there for, I think, insulin or something, and saying we all need to have that kind of healthcare system. And less than 15% of the Cuban population is vaccinated. and people were clamoring just for basic services, which again, whenever you mentioned at the beginning of this, the way in which they're like, oh, those kind of basic things like food and clothing and like, let us take care of that. Like you shouldn't have to worry about that. It's like, what happens in the places where they let us take care of that, in a completely totalizing way. That's what's going on in Cuba right now. And so I think there's another place, I don't think we have the quote in here, but where, Hayek, I love the way he'll frame some of these things where he'll say, once again, they promise more than they can deliver, and he'll say that over and over again. It's like, here's the promise, here's what they deliver. It's like, you wanted freedom and instead you're going to get a gun to the back of the head, and that's how this system ends up working pretty much every single time.
Yeah. There's a quote, I don't remember who said this originally, but the quote is, all shallows are clear. All shallow thinking seems obvious because you don't have to introduce nuance into it. So I think part of the strategy of all authoritarians in general, but planners especially, is like, you look at this disparity. You only have to look at the disparity and make the assumption based on the only data that you see, because all shallows are clear. If it's shallow enough thinking, then it's obvious what the answer is. But when you have to dig a little deeper, then it gets a little muddier. So I think that's, an important, really, if anyone does that to you, it doesn't have to be a planner or, someone, if a crazy right winger says that to you, if they say, oh, our country's going to, crap, and it's because of all these illegals coming over, it's like, okay, well, it's pretty shallow thinking. Maybe there's a bit more nuance to that. So I would just beware of anyone who proposes that as hey, here's the
anytime someone provides like a univariate answer, to any complex phenomena, like, you should probably ignore them. You could think about, is that a factor, right? Like, I think that's perfectly reasonable to go, yeah, is that a factor? Sure. But if they say, well, it's just racism or it's just capitalism or whatever, it's like, probably not, in a complex thing, obviously in like maybe one specific interaction, sure. But the more complex it is, the more complex the answer and the explanation are going to be. But of course, these people are not in the in the business of providing complex, nuanced answers. It's give us power so that we can, we'll tell you about that part later, right? What we'll do with that power.
Yeah,
you'll see.
So he goes on to talk about this idea of potential plenty, which I like this idea because it's a promise. Talk about empty promises made by planners. This is one of the biggest ones that's so flat on its face, is dumb. But I like what Hayek does here, where he kind of shows the about face that they did to flip their understanding of, what economics, what type of production incentives that they promise their people. So I'll go into it here. Quote, in their wishful belief that there is really no longer an economic problem, people have been confirmed by irresponsible talk of potential plenty, which, if it were a fact, would indeed mean that there is no economic problem, which makes the choice inevitable. But although this snare has served socialist propaganda under various names as long as socialism has existed, it is still as palpably untrue as it was when it was first used over 100 years ago. In all this time, not one of the many people who have used it has produced a workable plan of how production could be increased so as to abolish, even in Western Europe, what we regard as poverty, not to speak of the world as a whole. So they're talking about there's no one has come with an economic plan, the socialist economic plan, to say production is going to get boosted. They make the promise, but the people who are planners, ironically, never have a plan to do it. That reminds me of what is it? Elizabeth Warren. I have a plan for this. It's like, no, you don't. You say you're going to have a plan for it, and that is really the capacity they're acting in. But then they do about face here. That again, to quote, the reader may take it that whoever talks about potential plenty is either dishonest or does not know what he is talking about. This is kind of funny to me to read Hayek kind of doing this like diss here. I just kind of picture it as the really polite version of like, you're an idiot, stop talking. And to continue, yet it is false hope as much as anything which drives us along the road of planning. So, I think this is a really good example of we talked about how Orwell is influenced by Hayek. And I think like this chapter right here is what like Orwell took to do a lot of his novels, and even to be more specific about Animal Farm, because he even goes through the steps here. Step 1, promise potential plenty. Step 2, control consumption. Step 3, control production. And then step 4 is a slow death via starvation or government-sponsored genocide. You know, these are all the steps that the planners end up taking that's going to come to this inevitable conclusion as they make all these false promises along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that quote. The reader may take it, whoever talks about potential plenty is either dishonest or doesn't know what he's talking about. But I mean, I think that one of the things that he doesn't say it specifically there is like, this is just a false hope. You know, I mean, I think that whatever the reasoning is, there are people advocating for it. And wherever there's people advocating for it, there's going to be people who are power hungry that will go, yeah, potential plenty. I'll give it to you, you know? And just think about that. I follow this account called Libs of TikTok or something like that on Twitter, where it's like you'll find these crazy lefties making these TikTok videos. And so someone catalogs these. But the one that I showed you last night of this guy talking about how communism was so great. And he's like, communism is the closest we'll get to a utopia. And literally he ends it by saying, you won't have to work 60 hours a week to put food on your plate. You won't have to worry about, or he says, free access to the best healthcare and the freedom to do whatever you want without being restrained by money. It's like, okay, I don't have to work, so I get all the food I want given to me. I have access to the best healthcare, and that doesn't cost me anything either. And not only that, I can literally do whatever I want without having to worry about it costing me anything. So I could go to space like Richard Branson, right? Under the system, obviously. We all could, right? It's like, the amount of not like, I do think that it's like, yeah, you are either really stupid and naive and don't know what you're talking about, or you're being dishonest. That guy in that video, I think, was someone who is really stupid and naive and doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's where you get this institutionalized problem where it's like, I grew up in this like, you know, little lefty bubble in my home, and then I go right to university or whatever, and I never engage with the real world. I can see how someone would walk away with these crazy ass beliefs. I know, so there was a girl I went to school with who, she had a cousin that her family was able to convince her and maintain her belief in Santa Claus until she was like 16 or 17. She believed in Santa Claus for that long. You know, spoiler alert. Sorry, guys, Santa is not real, but Krampus is, and he's coming for you. And so, but the point is that like, he's not wrong. Like, these are things that sound good, you know, to the, what does Bain say? To the uninitiated, but we are initiated, aren't we, Bruce? You know, and so it's like, to those who are uninitiated in the real world and how it works, sounds great, you know, and that's fine if you want to have those utopian fantasies. But the problem is they're advocating for them, and there are lots of people like Elizabeth Warren, for example, who I think is one of the most detestable politicians of our time, who will say, "Yeah, I've got a plan. I can give you all those things. Just give me the power." And here's me awkwardly drinking a beer on a webcam or something like that with my husband.
Who looks like he's like
and it just doesn't work out that way.
He just looks like he's like
freaking hostage,
being kept slave. Like he's like trying to like Morse code blink, help me. The video.
Why did I? Gosh dang it. Yeah. Anyway, that's a trap I would not want to be in.
No. So like I said, they end up doing like an about face, the people who are the projected planners. So he goes into a quote here about that change in direction that they have. So quote, while the popular movement still profits by this false belief, the one we talked about before of potential plenty, claim that a planned economy will produce a substantially larger output than the competitive system, it is being progressively abandoned by most students of the problem. Even a good many economists with socialist views who have seriously studied the problems of central planning are now content to hope that a planned society will equal the efficiency of a competitive system. So like what they've abandoned, like it's going to produce more. And now they're saying, well, it's probably going to produce just as much, which is still not true. But this is part of the change that they're making. So to continue, quote, they advocate planning no longer as its superior productivity, but because it will enable us to secure a more just and equitable distribution of wealth. Where have we heard this before? They are no longer promising this increase in productive output, but they are promising, that great redistribution of wealth. I know we have a bit more of the comment here, but I think that kind of sums it up pretty good there, because, planned economies literally never become as efficient in the sphere of production as a market economy. The only like efficiency that they have that is an increase from a free society is like their concentration camps and the way they're able to systematically genocide people. It tends to be what they're most productive at.
Well, to at least steelman a little bit, they do actually increase efficiency. It's just they increase efficiency in one area at the cost of all of these other areas, right? So one of the things I was thinking about earlier, when we were talking about like having a job assigned to you, what have we been hearing a lot about with whether it's Green New Deal stuff or, this infrastructure, everything's infrastructure. Oh, jobs program, government jobs program, right? They use these examples of FDR's New Deal, which was a disaster, as something that we should try to replicate on an even larger scale. They did efficiently rally the entire society around the production of tanks and ammunition and Colt 45s, and all of these other things. But what happened? They converted like refrigerator factories, microwaves. I think what's the one you can get? You can find handguns that are made by like not Maytag. There's some that you can find that are manufactured by maybe a vacuum cleaner company or something. They're worth a lot because they were made and so they're branded with that thing. People can look that up, but it's either like a vacuum or like a washer dryer or a refrigerator type. But
imagine I have a gun that's got like Dust Devil on the side of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but the point is they did increase efficiency, but what happened there? What if I wanted to produce, what if I'm like, no, I want to make refrigerators? Too bad. Right. What if I want to make microwaves? What if I want to make bicycles? There was cars. Remember that they did the same thing. There were car manufacturers that were cranking out tanks and other military vehicles, and so it's like, what if they wanted to make cars? Too bad. Right. So they did increase efficiency on what the planners wanted to make in that wartime situation. And of course, that's the point is it's like people looked around and they're like, what if we did this all the time? What if this was just the natural state of things? And we could say, nope, we're not going to do fridges anymore. We're going to do whatever it is that I want, Yeah. And so they do increase efficiency, but it's at the decreased options and freedom of people to make what they want to make, produce what they want to produce. Because what's the other side of that? They rationed stuff, right? You couldn't get even chocolate, things like that. That's how that's how Nutella was invented, was during World War II. There was it wasn't in the United States, but it was France or Switzerland. I think it was Switzerland, where chocolate was being rationed. And so there was this guy who goes, what if I mix in hazelnut to try and, boost my production of a thing and to supplement the chocolate, and there you have Nutella. But my point is that whenever you have the government directing the entire economy around one thing, every other thing that people might want becomes rationed because it's not being produced, or it's not being produced in the volume that people are accustomed to. And that's the point. If you really want to look at the practical aspects of a planned economy, look at the United States during World War II and like all of the things that were rationed, all the things that weren't available. There was a whole thing during that point in time where they were trying to get this last one, but it's super fascinating. There was a whole propaganda campaign for organ meat. So because regular meat, cuts of meat, were being sent to the front lines, they had all these propaganda campaigns to make it where wives would maybe want to cook organ meat. So they would have these things where here's some recipes for like, liver and onions and stuff comes out of that. And it's like, you're doing your patriotic duty by eating organ meat, like liver and hearts and whatever, instead of regular meat, because regular meat was not as readily available because the planners were using it in these other places. It was being rationed. So that's the point. If you want a picture of what that even kind of looks like in its early stages, that's what it is right there. It's not something that you should aspire to.
Yeah, I think they did the same thing with carrots too. That carrots are supposed to improve your vision. There is something that improves your vision in carrots, but it's no greater than any other vegetable. So I think they did.
Well, I've never seen a rabbit wearing glasses, so I don't know if that's there might be something to the carrots thing.
Yeah, good point. But so I think I'm going to push back a little bit on the increased productivity, because there's something called like the honeymoon phase after socialism takes over, where a free market used to be. They have all these amazing tools that are there. They boost because they are able to plan these things, are able to boost production for a short amount of time. But that is the same, idea as to you don't use a wartime economy to make it a permanent economic system, because now you've used this temporary condition to prove the permanent condition, and you're going to run out of all these other things, or you have no incentive to improve. So, as I, flush out the idea of that, when the planners change their messaging from promising increased productive output to a more evenly distributed productive capital, there's several major holes in this logic. One being, wealth distribution assumes that wealth was distributed arbitrarily in the first place. Redistribution of capital incentivizes less production, not more. So already there, you're hurting your productive value by saying, Jeff Bezos, if you're really good at this thing, you're not going to get paid any more than this other guy, because, we're trying to evenly distribute the wealth, and that disincentivizes him from doing all the things that he is able to do above and beyond the normal person. So you're kind of taking that hit to your productive output. And the other thing is, a redistribution of capital made in a free society will effectively end the free market. You start socialism, the free market's now over, and this ends all the source of capital for future redistribution. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're cutting off, you're literally shutting off the well, and now you cannot maintain this productive output. It's naturally going to go down over time. And after a honeymoon period where you may have that boost, you may have, all of these different items that are now more affordable to the people. You're quickly going to run out of those items, or, as I say a lot of times in the sphere of healthcare, I'll have a lot of friends like, why is it for-profit healthcare? And it's like, well, if you go in, for XYZ surgery now, it's like you can get it done now. But imagine if we made public healthcare 100 years ago, we probably wouldn't have this now, because there'd be no incentive to create those innovations. So you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect to have both and maintain the type of progress that we've seen. And we know that free markets have created this progress because it created so much freedom and human prosperity all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, my point about how it increases efficiency is that they can efficiently do one thing at the cost of literally everything else. Mm-hmm. So, like, think about that hotel you talked about staying in China, and how in China there's provinces that will rally to build entire cities just to boost their GDP temporarily, and then the city sits abandoned, right? So in the United States, we wouldn't be able to do that nearly as quickly, because people would go, F you, I'm going to do what I want to do. Right. And so there would be the freedom would get in the way of that. But I'm not saying that they efficiently do anything worth doing or, long term. And again, I think that's also, is it a Soul quote, or it might be a Milton Friedman, where it's like, socialism always works in the beginning because there's plenty of wealth, but eventually in a free society, you've taken all the wealth. And so there's just nothing left to redistribute. And all you can do is send people to labor camps to make this one thing, and so, I'm not saying it makes society actually more efficient generally, and even permanently in that one way, but it does, at least for a short period of time. Again, back to World War II, it's like we were probably making more tanks during that time than we ever had in the past, right? Because they rallied the economy around that at the expense of everything else. And that's what planning does, is it makes it where freedom is not the thing. It's what does the planner want to do? That's the thing. Another way of this propaganda to eat organ meat is that's another way of saying, like, you're not going to get this other meat, so let's kind of gently, tell you, deal with it, right? And that's how they did with all these other things, like you mentioned, what carrots or any other thing. I think they did that with cheese a while back, where there was like the surplus of cheese, and so that's where there was like the Got Milk campaign and some other thing. This was all government stuff, where there was, they're in the working with these lobbyists from the farm industry, where it's like, how can we push this thing or push this thing, And so anytime you have that happening, it's because the government is pushing it for whatever reason, and it's not really a free thing. Obviously, Got Milk is very different than you have to eat livers and stuff, but the point is that in a planned economy, there's less freedom and there's more coercion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if we would have gone to a planned economy after World War II, would we all be driving like Sherman tanks instead of like a Prius? Because I'm willing to make that trade off.
I think I'd be okay with that. I have been told that we could not actually resist the government effectively unless we had, Shermans or Bradley linebackers or nuclear warheads. So, maybe that would actually have been better for us in the long run.
Nice. So the next section he goes in here now, which I really love. This is probably my favorite theme of the book, and he hammers home and a little bit in every chapter, but he talks about a return. The planners always say they want to be progressive. They want to progress into the future, this post-capitalist, post-Western, post-Christian future, where in reality, what they're really promising is a pre-Western, pre-capitalist, pre-Christian future, where, we return back to the Dark Ages, and that's effectively the promise. And here they kind of make that overt promise, in this section.
That's what the guy, so real fast, that's what that guy said in that video. Remember last night? He's like, we haven't actually had this except for the first maybe 4,000 years of human history. It's like, oh, when people died at 30, and like there's a 60% infant mortality rate and we all had dysentery and there was no upward mobility because there was no money. Like, that sounds like a great thing to emulate. But sorry, that's just what that made me think. It's just so insane.
Yeah, that was this is why I'm not on TikTok, but Hayek goes on to talk about how some of the planners are okay with a, quote, return to the ties and regulations which have governed economic activity through most ages, and that therefore the infringements on personal liberty need not be greater than they were before the age of laissez-faire. Basically, the system worked in the past. Their claim is the system worked in the past. Why not now? The problem is that we have gone so far in the development of just the world economy and human capital that at least for very large economies, is strongly reliant on each other. And I think you talked about before the interrelated activities that you cannot escape from. If you want to take control of the economy, you got to take control of all these other social things because all of these activities are interrelated. And that, planning would need to take a larger role in everyone's life. So he continues, quote, the passion for the collective satisfaction of our needs with which our socialists have so well prepared the way for totalitarianism, and which wants us to take our pleasures as well as our necessities at the appointed time and the prescribed form. That's crazy right there. Is of course partly intended as the means of political education, but it is also the result of the exigencies of planning, which consists essentially in depriving us of choice in order to give us whatever fits into the plan and at the time determined by the plan. When we've progressed in the future, where all of our economic activities are related to each other and reliant on each other, it's no longer the time where you got to eat. You just went fishing in the backyard. You didn't have electricity. You just burned wood for heat. You burned wood for light. These things, you can't just live off your own means anymore because we're so interconnected. So if we do build a planned society, do build a planned economy, it's going to affect you in every possible way it can, and depriving you of all this choice. And, you can only do this one thing if it fits within the plan and the framework of the plan.
Yeah. And not only that, but this idea of that it worked in the past. It's like, okay, well, even just the concept, like a lot of people today, if you were to say, what is serfdom, right? They wouldn't know what that meant because we've largely moved we're not at a place in history where modern serfdom, or where serfdom really exists, at least in the way it's historically understood. The same with like indentured servitude and all of these things. And it's like, it didn't really work in the past. Like, were there people that were able to, go out and homestead and live off land? Okay, fine, whatever. But again, they got dysentery, they didn't have access to all these things. And so the idea that going backwards in virtually any way, like substantively and quality of life and the way that we produce this quality of life is so insane to me. And it just shows either the ignorance or the naivete or the dishonesty, to quote Hayek, of the people advocating for this stuff. But I mean, he sums it up, like you said, right there, where it's like, look, this is about depriving us of choice, and we get whatever fits best in the plan as determined by the plan. That's what we get. What's the opposite of that? Getting what we want or what we want to work for, right? Or getting the opportunity to work for what we want. Or to not work if we don't want to do that and deal with the consequences of that. Go be a hobo somewhere. I guess you could say that the government does provide universal housing to homeless people because that's our tax dollars build bridges. So it's like, if you want to do that, that's where they're sleeping under. But the point is that there is no choice. There is no choice under this. And anyone that wants to move, what's funny is that I mean, and tell me what you think about this. I don't think that the people today would well, outside of that insane guy on TikTok, like we need to go back, 4,000 years of human history. They're going to run into some
that guy on TikTok has clearly never that guy on TikTok has clearly never played Oregon Trail.
There you go. Yeah. Or Age of Empires or something, or read a history book. But it's like, I don't think, I guess my point is that I think most people wouldn't advocate for that. Nowadays, it's that they're advocating for some future thing that doesn't exist and can't exist. But either way, it's utopian. It's either a like opaque rose-colored lens to view the past, or it's a naive, like blind and ignorant way to view the future. But the thing that both of those visions have in common is that neither of them are rooted in reality. And that's the point of this, is that none of these visions are rooted in reality, because it's the idea that you're going to get freedom from having your freedoms taken away. You're going to increase your choices by reducing your choices. I mean, it's just not how life works. And anyway.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to get into this footnote, but I there's always, like, when you read this book, you got to pay attention to the footnotes. If you have the Audible version, the guy reads it anyways, and he kind of changes his tone. So you might catch on if it's a footnote or not, but there's some brilliant stuff that he puts in here. And one of these is definitely one of those brilliant observations.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and read that. So he says it is no accident that in totalitarian countries, be it Russia or Germany or Italy, the question of how to organize the people's leisure has become a problem of planning. The Germans have even invented for this problem the horrible and self-contradictory name of Freizeitgestaltung. I don't know. Freizeitgestaltung. I don't know. Word in German. Literally the shaping of the use made of people's free time, as if it were free time when it has to be spent in a way ordained by authority. But if you're going to look at the theme of this chapter and why I think he just straight up he doesn't call it planning and economics. He talks about this is totalitarian, how it leads to totalitarianism. Just think about, for those of you still watching or listening, think about the progression of the idea here, where it's like, look, there's this little part of society. You'll have more freedom. You can have your democracy. You can have your freedom. Just let us take care of this one thing. Okay, well, wait a second. So now that we have control of this one thing, look, you might have to talk to us about what kind of business you want to open, or because now the use of all goods, including, okay, let's look at things like lumber. You can't build a house, all these other things. It all goes through us because we control the means of production. So, it is just this one thing, but you're just going to have to talk to us, if you want to do literally anything that requires you to obtain things. Well, wait a second. So in order for us to produce stuff, we have to have labor. We have to have workers. So we might actually tell you what job you have to have. And that includes where you're going to live and when you can come to work and all those other things. Well, wait a second. So if we do that, then we have to at least have something. We need to be able to get you when we need you, and we can't let you have all this free time. So we should probably come up with a system to make sure that we also are coordinating how you use your leisure time. So it's went from, you can have all the freedom, just let us take care of these little things, to we're going to tell you what you're going to do, where you're going to live, where you're going to work, who you're going to work with, who you're going to be around, what type of thing you're going to be producing, what type of thing you're going to be given, what you have access to, what you don't have access to, and also how you use your freaking free time, right? That wasn't a hypothetical. That footnote is not a hypothetical. Germany was a planned economy, and they're like, we need to figure out how we can direct people's free time. That's crazy. That's crazy. And you hear that, and people would be like, oh, what's the thing that is James Lindsay's talking a lot about lately, where it's like, you got these people who say that never happened here. That would never happen here. It never happened anywhere until it did, And so it's so ridiculous to think that these things aren't connected. And I love how he does say, like, look, this sets up it primes us for dictatorship. It primes us to submit to those experts, right? Like, look at how much priming do you think has taken place here with COVID, where it's like, hey, unquestioningly follow these experts here, right? Let them, we're going to shut down the economy. We're going to do all these things. And you want to talk about fake news? I got as an aside, an update from an NPR article today. It was prices increase 5.4% as the economy continues to surge. Inflation continues to be a problem as the economy surges. I don't think that's how that works.
One of the promises.
Yep. Anyway, so but the point is that we're being primed right now to just listen to these experts. And so if it's here, why not in all of these other areas? And that's what the people, I mean, when did Soul write Intellectuals in Society or Intellectuals in Race? I mean, 30 years ago? It was in the 80s or 70s, I think.
Yeah.
30, 40 years ago.
One of his 50 books. I don't know.
Right. And so, but the point is that we've been trotting out experts to prime us to listen to experts. Malice makes this argument about the public education system, how it's like, what it does is it teaches you from a young age that your value and intelligence is determined by this expert at the front of the room who you have to listen to unquestioningly. And to prime you for, I wouldn't go that far. I still think public education is garbage, but the point is that's what this does, Trust these few experts and it'll be fine. Here would be another modern example, and I'll stop here. Sorry, I'm just kind of thinking out loud about this. What if someone said, hey, just trust the experts with the pandemic. Hey, look, they're only going to think about this in terms of the virology. Okay. This won't impact anything else. It's just the virology. Don't worry about it. It's just this one little slice. Oh, wait a second. So, hey, that might also have to do with what you have to wear on your face, or a shot you have to get, or when you can go to work, or how many people can be in this business, or whether you can even be open as a business. Oh, wait, that determines how much money you're receiving if your work has been impacted.
Or what you can say on social media.
Exactly, or what you can see on social media. So that's a contemporary example of, look, it's just this one thing, let the experts do this one thing, and how it cascades to all of these other areas where it's, in, what was it, Ontario, where the police could pull you over just to ask you where you're going, and California and places like New York, they're having, at least during the peak of it, where it's like, report on your neighbors if there's too many cars in their driveway. People stopping other people on the street, where it's like, why aren't you wearing a mask outside, and stuff. And so it's like, that's one example of, this panel of experts. It's like, we'll just handle this one area. And of course, it's never just the one area. Yeah. And just follow that to its logical conclusion,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Germany had some very Orwellian, I suppose you can describe it, sayings. So they obviously had this one, how to control people's free time. They had the one, will set you free of freedom.
About math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
later about math.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's incredible to see. And again, the people are like, well, we're not them. Like, it's not going to happen here. Well, again, the book is written for this particular case, to say, like, there's an order of operations, and I have written down here that planning equals less control, which equals less choice, which equals less freedom. The planners know this, and one of the strategies of understanding that people are going to pretty easily figure this out is changing the definitions of those words, right? Like, you have less control and choice. It's like, well, the control and choice is a very unnecessary things. Like, who wants to think about getting your next, meal? Like, it's just this thing that we all want, so we'll just give it to you, so you don't have to worry about that choice. And then they have freedom, which, they try to say, well, are you truly free if you have to worry about all this stuff? Like, they change the definition, and this is what he gets to at the end of the chapter. When he talks about, it is often said that political freedom is meaningless without economic freedom. Okay, well, that makes sense, but they switch that. The planners switch that to mean, well, do you have economic freedom if you're in debt? Do you have economic freedom if you have to worry about how you pay for your next meal? Do you have economic freedom if you have to worry about how to get gas in your gas tank? Like, no. So let's take that away from you. So we give you this political freedom, right? That's the way they brand this stuff, and that's not the way it is. So Hayek continues to say that this is true enough, but in a sense, so he talks about, I'll reread the top quote. There's often said that political freedom is meaningless without economic freedom. This is true enough, but in a sense, almost opposite from that in which the phrase is used by our planners. The economic freedom, which is a prerequisite of any other freedom, cannot be the freedom from economic care, which the socialists promise us, and which can be obtained only by relieving the individual at the same time of the necessity and of the power of choice. Of choice. This is, you cannot have, relieving you of all of these responsibilities is not going to give you more freedom in the end. It's going to take it away, because this is a prerequisite of all other freedoms. So continuing here. It must be the freedom of our economic activity, which, with the right of choice, inevitably also carries the risk and responsibility of that right. And I love that last little phrase there, because a planned economy promises to relieve the individual of this burden of choice, the burden of freedom. And this relieves the individual of the burden, the risks, and the responsibility of freedom. It eliminates freedom, because as most people don't understand, especially growing up in the West, in a society where it's like, oh, freedom is just, this is the natural condition of the human being, is to be free. People here think that this is the default position. And if we just would stop doing all these crazy capitalist stuff and try to make people work for a living and work 60 hours, that they would automatically be more free. But what they don't understand is freedom comes with responsibilities. Freedom comes with risks. When you have freedom, you are responsible for yourself. When you have freedom and you have a family, you're responsible for the family. It is not the government's problem to take care of you, because once they do take care of you, they effectively own you. They're the head of the family now.
Yeah. I mean, that's so good. And just, again, how those are opposites, or not opposites, but how it's actually juxtaposed. It's like, you can't have political freedom unless you have economic freedom. And that last part is honestly one of the reasons why I really like, because this book and The True Believer were written 7 years apart, and how basically Hoffer addresses how, like, the appeal, why so many people might find this planning appealing, because of the burden of freedom. Is it can be stifling for people that don't want to use it, that for freedom, like, there are people that, like you said, freedom isn't the default state of society, but it's also not the default desire of individuals, right? That's the Mencken quote. People don't want to be free, they want to be taken care of. And I think that is true for most people. It's just that there was a point in time in our history, and actually for most of our history, where your ability to be taken care of was actually entirely dependent on your individual agency to pursue your own ends. So if I wasn't free to go and hunt and take care of myself, if I wasn't free to do all these things to provide for my family, I wouldn't be taken care of. And so people understood the connection between freedom and being taken care of. And so it was like, it's like, this is a responsibility. This is just about what I have to do to survive. And we've lost that link to where, and this is where I think the propaganda has worked so well over the last 100 years, where we've just like slowly moved away from history, where it's, look, this is, we're not going to tell you exactly what freedom, was used for, right? We're just going to assume that it's the default state of things. And so it's not that useful now. So you can trust us. We'll take care of these things for you. What? You don't have freedom, actually, if you're in debt or whatever. And so, by the way, there to give the devil his due, there is some utility to that, right? Like, it is correct to say, to kind of combine stuff from the last chapter and this one, it is correct to say that if you have overwhelming debt, you are locked out of certain things. But the point is, as like what he said in chapter 6 and what you went over earlier, is that as long as we all have the same rules that make it to where I acquired that debt or you acquired it or whatever, for whatever reason, it was that capital is accessible to us. We understand the risks or whatever. And then the same, way of paying it off is everyone. It's not like, and if you watch Ready Player One, speaking of dystopian futures, where there is this big mega company that buys people's debts and then puts them to work in this place, and then just comes up with arbitrary ways to give them more interest and stuff. And so they're just in indentured servitude for the rest of their lives. That's not the system we live in. It's not that arbitrary. It's once this reaches zero, and here's the ways that it reaches zero, here's the interest or whatever. Once this is, then you're done. Then you have the debt, or it's less, or, or whatever, you can make smaller or larger payments. But that's the point, is that even though this goes back to them, attributing the cause to like a symptom or to like a phenomena, that are blaming capitalism for something that it's like you said, they're just mad that there is an economic problem. We're all playing by the same rules either way, right? Some people might be required to take on more debt. Some people might start a little bit farther behind, but we all are playing by the same rules. And this idea that the planner can give us more freedom by taking some of our freedoms away is ridiculous. But either way, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but I just was thinking about that Hoffer thing about how freedom isn't something that a lot of people want. A lot of people don't want that. It's just in the past, they didn't really have an option to abdicate responsibility. They had to take responsibility or else they would die. Nowadays, it's a different situation.
Yeah, and that's the sweet irony of the TikTok guy. He's like, oh, the thousands of years before now. It's like, okay, yeah, that was freedom. That is freedom in its true sense, as long as there's no, warlord governing over, the people, the tribes back then. But it was like, yeah, you were responsible for your own life, and in the truest sense, you didn't get to rely on anyone else. So that is part of the burden of freedom. And luckily, we've built a free society where we've all prospered and progressed enough that we can help each other out with all these interconnected relationships. But by cutting all of those ties and going to a top-down authority to have the coercive power dictate what the plan is and how we ought to follow it, you're eliminating that freedom, that choice, your choice to pick what you want to do, what you want, to gain your own means to build your own ends is the ultimate risk and responsibility of freedom.
Yep. Well, and just real fast before we get to the kind of the summary, it was freedom in the same sense that, if you're in jail, there's a part of the day where you have free time to go roam around the yard, right? Or if you're in, preschool where they say, hey, we have free time. And it's like, okay, well, is it really free time? What if I want to go home? Well, no, but you can color. Okay, but I don't want to color. Well, too bad. Okay, well, so this isn't free time then. This is, you tell me here's 3 things you can do. That's a kind of freedom. And that's the freedom that these people were talking about, the previous, state of things type of freedom. It's like, it really isn't. And so whenever both of those are situations where there's a planner determining your freedom, that's what they want to go to, is where it's, yeah, you're free to operate within the plan. Well, how big is the plan? How many options are there? Like 2, So.
Yeah. Choice. So to kind of summarize up, we're trying to get as organized as possible and get some main takeaways. So we have some pre-prepared, and if you want, we can just exchange. I'll do the first and do second. We can do it that way if you want. So the main takeaways we want you guys to learn from chapter 7, we go through it, is number 1, planners promised by taking care of the less important aspects in our lives, meaning the basic necessities like food, shelter, and clothing, we can focus on those higher values like education, beauty, and philosophy. But it is these less important aspects that provide us with meaning and freedom in choices we make. Even those most mundane type of decisions we have to make, that's part of your freedom. And that shapes your true identity by being able to make those small decisions and those small choices that look small to us now, but every single choice you make is 1, an exercise of freedom, and 2, extraordinarily important to you being an individual and not having to follow this coercive authority.
Yeah, what you're going to eat for lunch is a burden to those who just have a lot of options. What you're going to eat for lunch is a burden in a different way for people that are starving, and so it's not, these are not minor things, is my point. This is not, again, look at the people of Cuba. It's like, look, we'll take care of the food and the medicine. You don't have to worry about that. It's like, oh, well, people are starving. So how's that going? North Korea, same thing. People are eating crickets, actual cannibalism. So the next thing, doesn't only affect us as producers, but also as consumers, and vice versa. It doesn't just affect what we consume, but it affects how we produce. We become widgets as well. Our ends, the things we want, have to be managed within the plan. What if I want to start a hockey team in Florida, or in, Austin, Texas? And the planner says, we don't want to put a hockey rink in that lot because they determine, look, there's the concrete and on the steel and all this other stuff. No, we don't think that should go there. We think that'd be, better used as, whatever, who cares? The point is that I don't get to do that thing, even if there was enough other people that wanted to do it. So our individual ends and goals have to fit within the plan. So anything we want to do or make or invent or pursue or innovate outside of the will of the planner has to be stifled via coercion. And money is what makes, like, the fact that we live in a society where it's free exchange and we use money, that's what makes it, or that freedom and that agreed upon currency is what makes it where we can pursue our own ends. But in a planned society, both of those things are taken away. Well, three, I guess. One is there could be money in a planned society. They say we're going to move to a moneyless society. You might get a little bit of money, but mostly it's you get this thing for doing this and this thing for doing this, not the money to pick and choose how you want, but also the freedom to choose what you want to buy, what kind of, how many varieties, going back to the example that Lindsay talked about, I think a couple weeks ago, where he's like, yeah, there's like 3 hats in the Soviet Union. I mean, that's an example right there, what is produced and what you as a person, like what your labor goes into, all of those things are dictated by the planners, all of those things. So anything outside of the plan has to be stifled, and then they'll use coercion to get you back in line with the plan.
Absolutely. So third one is planners used to promise a potential plenty, but then changed their promise once they found their plans could never increase productive output. They then switched to promising wealth redistribution, which is what we hear today. Wealth redistribution kills productivity by decreasing the incentive to be in the market. So not only does even their idea, the promise of wealth redistribution, kill their original promise of increased production, it now why does it make sense for me to try harder than everyone else if I'm getting the same thing that everyone else gets? It kills just the human motive to innovate and become better. And this is literally how you stifle progress. And you're going to find out, even if there's that honeymoon period where production is increased for that short period of time, you're going to quickly find that you're going to regress to again, pre-capitalist, pre-Western society.
Yeah, which is not a good thing.
No.
I think we hit that pretty hard there. And the last one is, planners claim that this like economic freedom, there's actually a burden, it's an unnecessary burden because it leads to unequal outcomes, because it leads to, you have to work, you have to do these things. And they say, look, the government can take care of it, but the problem with that is that economic freedom is a prerequisite for all other freedoms. And that comes through risk and responsibility. You have to be in a society where you can take risks, where you can take responsibility. That's one of Jordan Peterson's rules in his new book, is that rewards, weight or treasure weights where responsibility, or opportunity weights where responsibility has been abdicated. And so it's like, if you live in a society where you see people aren't taking responsibility, aren't taking risks, you can fill that niche, and there might be some opportunity and reward that waits for you there. But you have to have the freedom to do that. Having that economic freedom is a prerequisite for all those other freedoms to risk or not risk, or to innovate or not innovate. If you don't have that, you don't have an access to any other freedoms, right? Again, it's like, if I'm shoveling snow, can I get money that eventually I can spend on a bike, or I can spend on a shirt, or I can spend on a video game, or whatever thing? Either way, I'm the one that gets to decide that. But that economic freedom is what is the prerequisite for any other goals or any other means or any other desires I have. If I have that, then I can't get any of it. Or if I don't have that freedom, then I can't get any of those things.
100%. Yeah. So, I think we summed it up pretty good here. For those of you, following along, if you haven't been able, this is episode number 6. So we have 5 more episodes before this. We kind of go in the chronological order according to the book. But I think all this information is really good. Of course, I always advocate that if you really want to learn every single thing that he's talking about, read the book yourself. It is with an Audible account. It is free to get the audio only version. And there are a couple of resources I know we've been posting along the way that give us kind of a chapter free PDFs online.
Yep. So there's some PDFs you can get that are like the first 3 chapters. There's some that's like every odd chapter for some reason, and not the even ones. But either way, and you can get access to these, and there's, lots of resources, as Kevin said. And, I guess I do want to add one thing, just for the folks at home, as Norm Macdonald would say. I swear that's it's like in my brain, is that the main takeaway, we just laid out 4 things there. But if you go back and look at like the previous chapters, all of this is about how planning, which when you think about that, think top-down control, unelected bureaucrats, collectivism, whatever, is incompatible with freedom in all these other areas. It's incompatible with freedom, in a democratic system of governance. Of course, we have to be careful with that because we're in a republic. It's incompatible with the rule of law that is equally applied, and it's incompatible with freedom in the economic sphere. In fact, it all leads to totalitarianism. With the lack of consensus, there will have to be coercion in all of these areas. And this is like the first place where he gets into where he's like, I'm not even going to try and I'm just going to come out and tell you this will lead to dictatorship and totalitarianism if you allow to for the planners, for the elites, for the experts or whatever to take your freedom in this one area. They'll take your freedom in these other places, and it's a process. It won't happen overnight, but it is a process. And so this is one of the places where my point is why I wanted to say this, is that it's so prescient today. The stuff with COVID, the stuff with climate, everything they use. It's like, trust the experts, give your power, give your autonomy to the experts, to the, those who know better, and they'll take care of this one thing. Let us take care of the environment, or, the Green New Deal or whatever, global warming. Let us take care of it with this Green New Deal. Oh, it's going to be total control over your life. Same with COVID. Hey, we'll worry about the virology. Oh, it's going to be total control over your life. And so this is prescient, and we've been building to this through this gradual move to these unelected bureaucrats, to these experts over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And so this is why we're even reading this book, is because this all matters right now. And and Hayek was taking those ideas to their logical conclusion and saying, this is where it's happened before. We have to take the ideas of the things we're seeing right now to their logical conclusion and say, where is this leading? It's continuing down that road. Hayek lays it out. If you take this, it's going to take you to serfdom. We're on this path right now, and we have the examples from modern day of what's going on. And I think that they overlap really nicely with, well, not nicely, it's horrifying, but with the stuff that he lays out in this book. Or not in this, but not just in this book, but in this chapter. This chapter felt, and the next chapter is like another one I was telling Kevin last night. I'm like, I feel like we could talk. I mean, it very much is this same idea of like, well, who gets to decide? So it's increasingly going to get more and more prescient. And so just, that's why we're going over this. This isn't just a history thing. This matters for today thing.
Yeah. So future episodes dropping on Mondays. We're going to stay up the schedule, and we also have some exciting interview opportunities coming up here. So, stay subscribed if you're not, but if you want to subscribe, make sure to go to returntoreason.locals.com to give Truman a follow and join his growing community. That place is a fun house over there. I'm going to try to post more, obscure pictures of caulking. I know it's going to sound weird to people who do not know the background context to that, but I'm just going to leave it there. Right. Caulk guns.
Construction.
Find Truman's writing by searching Return to Reason on Medium. He's also on ThinkSpot by going to Return to Reason. He's on Twitter at My Mundane Mind. And did I miss anything there? YouTube, obviously. Yeah. Return to Reason on YouTube.
Well, and the locals, returntoreason.locals.com.
Yeah. I plugged that first.
Well, I don't know if you gave the URL. It doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. I know that you did. But anyway, and Kevin, engineeringpolitics.locals.com. Yeah, ENG_politics on Twitter. Same ThinkSpot, Medium. I finally took the link because I had a pre-saved thing of to your website, engineeringpolitics.com, out of like the list of links where people could find you the other day.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh gosh, I've had that in there for like way too long. But Kevin's in all the same places, Engineering Politics. Be sure to follow him on Twitter. He does not get enough follows on Twitter, so be sure to give him a follow and sub and all those other things to show your support. Is that it? Are we good?
That's
what do you
it,
think?
Man.
All right. Hey, thank everyone for watching. Thank you guys. This is a lot of fun. We're enjoying this. And like Kevin said, there's some fun stuff coming up. But we'll have to, you'll have to stay tuned to see what that is. So anyway, thanks again. We'll see you guys next time.